Welcome to Eating Right, Achieving Wellness Through Nutrition. My name is Alexia Brue. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Well+Good. It's a media company, and we cover a lot of things, but the thing that unifies all of our readers is food, and that question of what to eat, because we all know that when we choose what we consume wisely, it can really fuel our wellness, our vitality, and our long-term, and our longevity. So I'm thrilled to be joined by the renowned integrative doctor, Dr. Mark Hyman. What? Functional medicine doctor, fact-checking in real time. And three amazing food founders and CEOs who are creating products that are really profoundly changing the way that we can all eat. And I understand this is, I think, the only panel at Milken that really addresses what to eat, or what the heck to eat, to borrow from Mark's book title, which is a phenomenal book. And spoiler, I'll save the spoiler, but made me rethink bacon, so that was good in a positive way. So I'm going to let each panelist.
You're a baconitarian.
I'm a baconitarian, yes. Very
except
key.
for bacon.
And Dr. Hyman, Mark also coined the term pegan, which hopefully we'll get into. That is the love child of paleo and vegan, which is really exploding. So I'm going to let each panelist introduce himself and how his company, or in Mark's case, organization, helps people cut through the clutter of conflicting advice, what you call nutrition whiplash, right? Of one day eggs are great, the next day they're going to kill you, coffee is great, coffee is not great. Are nightshades okay to eat, right? The headlines are so confusing. So how does your company help consumers hone in on a dietary approach that's right for them? And I'll start with you, Nick, if that's okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Am I mic'd? Awesome. Well, before I dive in, I just do want to do a thank you. This is the first time that I've gotten to meet you, and Well+Good was actually the only platform that covered our launch. And the one that set our first 500 to 1,000 members in motion. So
amazing.
Hats
Thank
off. Huge kudos. So I'm the founder and CEO of Thrive Market. We are a membership club that gives access to healthy and nutritious products, kind of the best products that you find in a health food retailer at 25 to 50% off. Through a membership model. So you pay $60 a year, get access to everything basically at wholesale prices, shipped to your door anywhere in the country for free. Actually, in the Well+Good article, I think the way that you guys described it was that if Whole Foods and Costco had a baby, it would be Thrive Market. That sort of sums it up. But I think what really differentiates us and where we're really focused is our mission, which is to make healthy living truly accessible to anyone. And we think about that in terms of kind of the barriers to getting healthy and, more importantly, staying healthy in terms of your diet. And two of those are structural. So price is obviously a big one. We're trying to make healthy living more affordable. Another one is geography, right? 60% of Americans don't live within driving distance of a health food store. But a big one, and I think the one that we're going to talk about today, and we spend actually the most time talking about because it's a lot more amorphous and it's a lot more difficult to solve, is what I call kind of the X factor, and that's the intimidation factor, the kind of information overwhelm, the paradox of choice, the inertia of eating the way that you've always eaten. And we have a lot of people that can afford to eat healthy, that do live near health food retailers, and yet aren't eating healthy. Some of them may be in this room. And it really comes down to that X factor. So we think about that a lot, and there's sort of a number of things that we look towards, but three that we've really focused on to try to break down that barrier. The first is curation. So we do not carry 40 almond butter SKUs. You go on Amazon, you search for almond butter, you might get 140, right? Whole Foods, you might get 40. At Thrive, you're going to get 4, but they're all going to be the highest quality. No palm oil, no added salt, no added sugar. You can outsource your trust to us and know if it's on Thrive, you can very simply find the right product and you don't have to think a lot about it. The second thing is we actually tag all of those products across 140 different metadata categories. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot easier with a curated catalog than a giant catalog. But what that enables us to do is allow people to personalize their experience to them. So if you are wanting to try to be paleo, you've got a husband who wants to be vegan, and you have a child with a nut allergy and another one that's lactose intolerant, try that at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. On Thrive, it's literally 4 clicks, everything filters down, and you kind of got your shopping list. And then the last one, which has been really interesting for us, and I'm sure you can provide a lot of insight into, Alexia, is actually content. Mm-hmm. So we were really fortunate when we went out to raise money. We actually got rejected by 50 venture capitalists plus. and ended up having to go to influencers, people in the health and wellness space. So Mark was one of those people, literally one of the first checks in. And we've actually, I should give another shameless plug. Another one of the first checks in was Power Plant Ventures, who's, I believe, in this room, Dan, and I don't know where Kevin is. They were the only institutional investor to write a check. And so they're out raising a fund right now. If anyone is looking to get access to high quality early stage startups in the health and wellness space, they did it. Or you can follow Mark's investment advice, because he did it too. But in any case, we have a lot of these folks who are actually...
I did no due diligence. I just said, that's a great idea. Here's the money. They tried to keep talking to me, and I was like, no, just where do I send the money? So,
We did our diligence.
I figured somebody did.
The greatest value, though, hasn't actually been the checks that got written. It's actually been that those people now are a huge community for us of influencers that write about Thrive, that do Facebook Live about our products, and that help people not only buy the products, but learn about how to use them, learn about where they come from, and really get inspired to go out and do it. So that's been a major difference maker for us. And I think if I would boil down kind of all of those factors, it's really about just making it easy, right? Like whether you're trying to be paleo or you're trying to be vegan, the most important thing is you're eating real food and that you're sticking with whatever you're trying to do. And all of those things have been really effective in trying to make that happen.
That's great. Okay, Shane Emmett, founder and CEO of Health Warrior. Talk to us a little bit about how Health Warrior is helping people hone in on the right nutrition path for them.
Well, thank you for the layup, Nick. It's always nice to sit next to one of your favorite customers as you're doing one of these things. And we're hoping to launch some vegan products with Nick in the back half of the year. So we can talk about that later. But Health Warrior is a plant-based snacking brand. And we had an idea after reading two best-selling books. One's called The Omnivore's Dilemma. Has anyone read it? By Michael Pollan. The other one is called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. The Omnivore's Dilemma, the short story is the great majority of food Americans eat is packaged food, and the great majority of that packaged food is not good for us. There are 300,000 edible plant species. 3 of them make up the majority of our American calories in highly refined formats, and it's causing an obesity and diabetes epidemic. However, there's all these other wonderful foods out there, many of which are shelf-stable and therefore could be in packaged food. So in the book Born to Run, we read about chia seeds. And everyone knows what chia seeds are now, but
Chia pet, right?
The chia pet, right? And it doesn't grow back hair, which is the joke I get almost constantly. My father thinks it's great to send a chia pet to the office at least once a quarter, and he can do that from Amazon with one click now. But chia was one of the top 4 foods in the Western Hemisphere for 2,000 years. The Spanish wiped out the crops when they conquered the Aztec nation. So here's the highest plant-based form, or one of the highest, of omega-3s, protein, and fiber. And it tastes like nothing. It's a great ingredient, 3 to 5 year shelf life, and no one had been using it for food. So the idea was, wait a minute, we can make packaged food with a nutrient-dense whole food, a superfood, as the main ingredient instead of sugar. And the entree point for us was to look at the nutrition bar category, because it turns out most of those nutrition bars have more sugar than candy bars. In fact, the average amount of sugar in a nutrition bar is about 15 grams of added sugar. And so we said, wait a minute, we can make something with 2 to 3 grams of sugar and have a superfood as the main ingredient and have it taste delicious and still be radically convenient. And we never set out to be a chia seed company. The name Health Warrior is a metaphor. Aztec warriors famously carried chia seeds everywhere with them. And the state of the food world needed a little bit of an uptick. We thought, you have to make it fun, you have to make it delicious. You can't just lecture folks about eating more nutrient-dense foods. I was a civil rights lawyer before we started this food company, and something we believe in very deeply is access to that healthy food. And it's been a shock to me. We launched nationally with Whole Foods 5 years ago after Well+Good wrote an article about us.
We're going to do one on territory, Patrick.
Wall Street Journal followed quickly thereafter, and we were very fortunate. We sold like 100,000 bars on Amazon in under an hour, ran totally out of stock. But you realize that food access really, in large part, one reason I love what Nick is doing, comes down to being able to find stuff in a grocery store. I didn't realize how little control many of us have in terms of our behaviors when we go shopping for groceries, based on what's merchandised, what's at checkout, what's on an end cap. So since we launched nationally with Whole Foods, we've been fortunate to grow really quickly. We had the best-selling new bar in the country in 2013. And we've moved on from chia seeds and just launched a line of pumpkin seed bars. So they're 70% pumpkin seeds, teaspoon of organic honey and spices. It's the only certified organic bar in the country. It doesn't have sugar as the main ingredient. And we like to think it's still before sunrise and we're just getting started, but the access, we have to realize that in terms of healthy snacking, our lives are not going to slow down anytime soon. I had dinner with Dan Buettner, the author of the Blue Zones Diet. Dan, I don't know if you were in here last night, and I was like, man, I really want to live the way Dan does, and I really don't, and I'm not going to anytime soon. So being able to make it easy for people to genuinely eat, not better for you, but good for you food on the go is a big part of our mission. And you know, to be able to build value doing the right thing and making good for you food is really, really powerful. So we have a fired up, mission-driven team and have been able to attract really awesome capital and great people who actually know what they're doing in the food industry, unlike myself.
Thank you, Shane.
Of course.
Patrick Smith, I'd love for you to introduce Territory to the audience for those who don't know it and how you guys are helping people make better choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alexia. So with Nick, we have shelf-stable and frozen products. With Shane, we have snacks. We represent the fresh category. We're the largest local fresh prepared meals company in the country. We're operating in 4 cities right now, 4 regions, the Mid-Atlantic, in and around DC, Southern California, here from the Valley to Riverside to San Diego, the Bay Area, and Dallas-Fort Worth. But what that's really about for us, actually, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you have had transformational experiences in health where food is a major factor? That's what we're about. We're about being a partner with our customers in transformational wellness. This is rooted in a personal need that I had. I had an amazing life-changing experience between the combination of food and fitness. And incidentally, even though I know this panel is about what we should eat, we shouldn't ignore what we should do and how we should move. But ignoring that for the moment, what I found to be the hardest problem was finding a source for super clean, high-quality food that I wanted to eat every day. When I wasn't cooking, Mark. I found that restaurants, I couldn't get that with restaurants, either the quality or the transparency. What kind of processed oils are they using, for example? I had no idea what was in restaurant food. I didn't want to eat it every day. And on the grocery side, it's like most Americans, I found it to be very time-consuming, complicated, and require a lot of creativity to make food that I wanted to eat every day. So that launched me down this path, is my third company, launched me down this path. And we're a partnership between chefs, nutritionists and dietitians, and fitness communities. In every local market, we have a network of professional chefs that cook out of commercial kitchens, making amazing food. These are super high quality chefs making they make food that you want to eat every day. I think we have some customers in the room, actually. Maybe they can attest to that. The nutritionists and dietitians are in-house, so they work in cooperation with the chefs to make meals according to the dietary parameters that we have. And then we're creating an intermediate distribution network through health and wellness partners, mostly fitness communities. There's some amazing fitness communities that we have. We're working with over 500 of them in the 4 cities that we're in. And so really what this boils down to is how do we get the highest quality food in a convenient, economical package as close to our customers as possible. If I had to guess, for all of you that that noted you had transformational experiences with food, there would be some common baseline standards: reduce or eliminate added sugars and sweeteners, reduce or eliminate artificial ingredients and processed ingredients, including a lot of vegetable oils. Input, basically real whole food, clean ingredients. But then on top of that baseline, a huge variety of eating preferences. That's what we support. So we have, depending on the market, we support up to 13 different eating styles, from low carb to low fat, pre and postnatal, vegetarian. So we're really a diet agnostic platform to help customers explore their own health and wellness on a daily basis and essentially claim their own territory of wellness.
Dr. Hyman, Mark, maybe you can talk with the impetus of writing your last book, which is recently published, just out in February, What the Heck Should I Eat? And just sort of introduce how you work with patients. And I think also it would be really interesting to hear the process when a patient comes to you. I think all of us would love to know, like, the tests that you run, how you help someone personalize their own nutrition plan.
Yeah, well, practice something called functional medicine, which is a systems approach to health and disease. It's sort of the science of creating health based on understanding the root causes of disease and then understanding the elements that create health and providing those. And a lot of it has to do with food, and we consider food not just calories or energy, but information. And yet the prevailing view in the scientific community is that calories matter, that calories in and calories out is the way to lose weight. And it's sort of far from what the science shows, which is that food is information, instructions. It can upgrade your biological software with every bite, literally change your gene expression, your hormones, your immune system, your gut microbiome, your brain chemistry, and on and on. And it literally happens in real time, and none of us really understand that. And in terms of patients, I've been working in this field for almost 30 years and studying nutrition way back 40 years ago, and I started applying it with my patients using the lens and the sort of the model of operating system of functional medicine, and I had the unique ability to do literally thousands of dollars worth of testing on thousands of people over decades at Kenya Ranch and in my own practice. And it gave me a very unique perspective because we looked at nutritional profiles, essential fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, as well as looking at gut, immune system, toxic overload, and so forth. And what I learned was that that there are a lot of people out there who are eating in a way that's either driving the aging process and all the cardiovascular diseases, dementia, cancer, diabetes. And there's also people out there who are also very nutritionally deficient. You think in this world we see people who are nutritionally replete, but vitamin D, folate, iron, zinc, essential fatty acids. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. Magnesium. These are common nutritional deficiencies that have, broad impacts on people's health. So, when I first sort of evaluate a patient, I kind of do what I call an inclusive history. When you go to the cardiologist or the gastroenterologist, if you start talking about your skin rash, they're going to go, wait a minute, go to the dermatologist. But in our view, everything is connected. So I really take a very inclusive history, looking at their diet, their lifestyle, their stress levels, obviously environmental exposures, their genetics, how they were born, whether they had antibiotics. There's just a whole lineage of data. And you can often tell just by talking to somebody what's going to be a problem. And the truth is that from a metabolic perspective, 70% of Americans are overweight, 40% kids. And most of those people have what we call insulin resistance, which is a form of carbohydrate intolerance. So I can almost look at someone and tell you what their blood levels are going to be, and by looking at their face and levels of inflammation in their face and fluid retention, I can tell if they have inflammation in their bodies. And then we dive down with diagnostics, and then we personalize the approach. So some people are extraordinarily sensitive to carbohydrates. Other people can have more. Some people are, eating in a way that's driving tons of inflammation, and then you have to adjust things that are inflammatory foods in the diet, and you kind of personalize the approach. But I would say, over the years, I've come to realize that there are a set of principles of eating that are pretty broad, that I think most people would agree on, that there's not a lot of debate about, and that we need to sort of kind of cut through the sort of whiplash, as you were saying. And I think, if I can just kind of go on for a minute, I think
please.
the reason that we're confused is due to multiple factors. One, nutrition science itself is inherently difficult. The best science would be to take 10,000 people, split them in half, put them in a resort for 20 years and feed them different diets and see what happens. That's never going to happen, right? Although they have done those studies in mental institutions and others, which have shown extraordinary results. Then we look at observational data, which is mostly asking people what they ate last week, writing it down every year. Once a year, and then looking for patterns in the data. But that doesn't prove cause and effect. And that's what a lot of our data show. She was talking about bacon, so the data on processed meat shows there's a 20% increase in your risk of colon cancer. What that shows is actually that's a relative risk, not an absolute risk, and the risk goes from 5% background rate of colon cancer in the population to 6%. So that's a 20% increase. If you ate 4 pieces of bacon every day your whole life. Well, most people aren't going to do that. And then if you look at these type of observational studies, if you see a signal, it has to be a big signal to probably be a causation. In other words, smoking was 20 to 30 to 1. Bacon is 0.2 to 1 risk. So you can't really get definitive data through observational data. And then, of course, you've got the media swinging us back and forth. Coconut oil's good, coconut oil's bad, eggs are good. It's like, then we get nutrition whiplash. And then nutrition science itself is corrupt because it's largely funded by the food industry. That's where the bulk of our science comes from. And when you look at the data, 8 to 50 times more likely to show a positive outcome for their studies. Studies on aspartame by the food industry show this. 99% of the studies show it's safe. 99% of studies done independently show it's not safe. So how do we begin to sort of navigate that as a layperson or even as a doctor or scientist? It's almost impossible. And I've spent my life studying this. So I've come up with a series of principles I call the Pegan diet, which was a total joke. It was a spoof. I was sitting on a panel with a vegan cardiologist and a paleo doc, and they were fighting. And I was like, wait a minute, guys, if you're a paleo, you're a vegan, I must be Pegan. And then I began to think about it. I'm like, okay, well, what are the common principles? The things we all agree on. One, we should all be eating a lot of vegetables. Like your mom said, eat your fruits and vegetables. And the majority of our diet should be plant foods. We should be not eating foods that raise our blood sugar. High glycemic foods, which is about 60% of our diet, is refined starches and sugars. And that's driving this obesity, chronic disease epidemic that's crippling our global economy. I think lifestyle preventable disease is going to cost $47 trillion over the next 20 years. It's going to cripple economies. The World Economic Forum said it was the biggest threat to global economic development. So that's a huge issue. And then we should be eating a lot of good fats, avocados, olive oil, nuts. There's a debate between saturated fat and plant oils. I won't get into it right now, but that's a big debate. And I think that at the end of the day, saturated fat turns out not to be the boogeyman we thought it was. Cholesterol now is considered not a nutrient of concern according to the Dietary Guidelines. Dave is nodding and everything. It's good to have a
20 years ago.
Yeah, and we should be eating a diet that has lots of fiber, whole grains, beans. We should be eating a diet that, I think limits our modern dairy. Modern dairy is problematic for all sorts of reasons. Particularly the type of casein is in it is much more inflammatory, much more likely to cause cancer and other issues. In fact, Darius Mazzaferin, who's the dean of Tufts School of Nutrition, last night at dinner was talking about milk globulin, which is a part of the milk that kind of covers beneficial things in the milk that are immune proteins. And they did a study, which no one had ever done, showing like homogenized butter versus unhomogenized whipped cream, and found that they had same amount of fat, same calories, exactly the same food, just processed a little different. The raw, unhomogenized dairy did not cause any change in cholesterol, where the homogenized ones caught a huge impact in cholesterol. So that's the informational quality of the food that we're taking in. And then, of course, we should be not eating a lot of processed food. I mean, everybody sort of agrees we should be eating 3 to 5 pounds of food additives every year, like butylated hydroxytoluene that's in our food, which is not healthy for us, and all these colors and dyes and things that drive different behavioral issues. And that we should just be eating a real food diet. And if we eat animal protein, we should probably eat in a way that doesn't cause climate change, environmental degradation, harm the animals, and produce meat that's of poor quality that has more adverse effects. I mean, I think, and it's nice to the animals, right? So we can have these sort of common principles that I think are guiding, that allow us to eat within a wide range of diets. So that's really how I think we need to rethink food. And there's so much debate in this, religion, politics, and nutrition are nobody can agree on. And I think we have come to a place where there is a good solid nutrition science base, and we can come to agreement on these basic principles. And within that, there's a wide variety depending on what you need to personalize.
It's interesting. I mean, you're talking about like food tribes in a way, and we're going to get to that in a second with one of Patrick's slides. But we really see keto right now is a #1 search term for us. There's a lot of obsession around the keto diet. Nick, I'd love you to talk about sort of how you guide Thrive Market customers through this. I know you have your different shop buy categories, and I was really interested to learn that your fastest growing team is data science right now at Thrive Market. So if you can kind of share how you educate people through content and how you curate based on Food Tribe.
Yeah, so again, the principle for us is make it easy, make it accessible. And one thing we found definitely does not work is telling people what to do. So if you wag your finger at them, you tell them what to do, what not to do. If you're overly prescriptive, they react in the exact opposite way you want them to. So what we've tried to do is first, curate along the kind of basic guidelines that meet some of the standards that Mark was just talking about, and then tag every product across these 140 metadata categories so that they can actually go and be active participants themselves. And I think there's some practical benefits to that, which I spoke to a little earlier, where you've got the mom who's shopping for sort of different dietary needs, maybe different values, different lifestyles that each person in her household might be trying to try. You've also got people that want to try something like paleo or just heard about keto and don't really know where to, what does that mean, right? So having a shop by allows them to do it really quickly. I actually think the biggest thing is just having people be an active participant in their own health decisions. Like, regardless of which shop buy you use, the fact that you now feel empowered, you're now making a decision, there's something in that that creates change, that causes habit formation, and that I think is really, really meaningful for people. Now, I say that, and at the same time, as you mentioned, data science is the fastest growing team in our business. And the goal there is to actually not just let you say what you want, but preempt what you want based on what you've bought before, what you've read, where you've browsed, how long you spent on certain pages. We just hired a head of data science who came over from Netflix and Facebook. No background in retail, no background in food. So it is a pure data correlations, machine learning kind of play. And to be honest, I have some hesitation about that because it takes the ownership off of the person. It's incredibly powerful what they can do and the way that they can predict products that you'll like, and diets that might be interesting to you, or even content that you'd want to consume, recipes that you might want to use with the products that you're buying. But I think that there's where we're ultimately going to land, and there's incredible promise with AI and machine learning and data science as a whole. But I think where we're going to land is a hybrid, where you serve up things that give people some nudge gently, and then you let people make decisions themselves so that they're an active participant and they can actually stick with it.
Great. Patrick, can you share with us some of the trends you're seeing at Territory? You have meal plans that sort of echo their shop by categories, and I think you have some slides to share as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And echoing also what Nick is saying about supporting people in their own exploration. I mean, that's really what we're about on top of that baseline, those baseline standards. We sit in a really unique position, at least in terms of the forefront of the wellness market in general, because we're serving all of these intentional eating styles and we're serving all of these different fitness communities. You see very similar trends happening on both sides. If you want to put up the first slide, I'm not sure. It's fascinating. 39% of the US population is an intentional eater in one form or another. And similarly, in the last 5 to 10 years on the fitness side, there's been an explosion of all of these different tribes on the fitness side. So at the macro level, what we're really seeing is the move from a single source of truth and one way of going about this, whether that's food or fitness. Typically, historically, that's been through deprivation and pain and an individualistic pursuit. And we're seeing that move to a culture of personalization and exploration, joy, and community. It's really interesting on both sides, food and fitness, that we're seeing these trends happen in parallel. Digging in a little bit more on the food side, if you want to go to the next slide, we see dramatic results. So on top of that baseline, those baseline nutritional standards, we see dramatic results with completely opposite eating styles. These happen to be two major influencers, one on the keto side, that's Mark Sisson, that low carb, high fat, and on the performance macro side, that's an elite CrossFit athlete, Brooke Enns, who eats pretty much exactly the opposite, high complex carbs and low fat. Mark, you may be able to talk about this, but there's a NIH Stanford study that studied these two different approaches. It was recently published in the Journal of American Medical Association.
But that didn't have a big delta between the high fat, high carb diet.
At a mean, that's true.
Yeah.
But what you saw was in both approaches, some people responded amazingly well to one or the other. So it really does.
No, but I mean the diet itself wasn't they weren't that different.
That's true.
It wasn't like a low carb diet of 20%. It was, or 10%. It was 40%, which is better than our 60% in our population. But
yeah. I think Gary Taubes was the representative of the low carb advisors there. So, but regardless, what we see both in our customers and in influencers is these two dramatically different approaches yielding very similar radical results. So it's, again, super confusing. But I think this really boils down to an N of 1. How do we experiment and figure out what works for us individually?
But you do 5 hours exercise a day.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't matter what you eat.
That's true
That's the
for
takeaway, yeah.
that may be true for Brooke. That's not true for Mark. I know. If you want to go to the next slide,
Maybe he doesn't exercise that much. No.
right? Yeah. We see this echoed in search trends broadly. So this is over the last 5 years. Incidentally, those spikes are in Januaries, so you can track annual progress. The blue line at the top, that's paleo, so you can see that declining over the last 4 years pretty significantly. Vegetarian holds pretty steady. You see some increase in low carb, but the real outlier here is keto, like we've already mentioned. It's just exploding in the last 2 years, super interesting.
I wonder if it's because I wrote that book, Eat Fat, Get Thin.
The clinicians on our staff have real concerns about keto and how that actually can have really deleterious effects for some people. So they asked me to caution everybody, don't go out and eat keto. And if you do it with medical supervision, or at least regular blood testing. But you can see the trends here. It's caught in the popular consciousness. This diet that has traditionally been used for radical weight loss is now moving into the mainstream. And if we want to go to the next slide, this is really representative of, I think, Pegan, clean whole foods as a baseline, and then personal experimentation inside that. And then the last slide. This, one of the things that we're talking about here is what you should eat, but I think there's also these two other pieces, how you should do it and who you should do it with. So how you do it, is it isolated decisions or is it with a trusted guide? And who you do it with, as opposed to exploring it on your own, doing it as part of a community. The Daniel plan that you worked on is a really great example of that, I think. So those are some interest from the sort of macro food and fitness all the way down to individual personal decisions and these broader trends around exploration and personalization.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mark, I want to take a step back and sort of have you walk us through dietary guidelines and what's going on nationally there, and just the legacy of confusion based on, you write a lot about, I don't know how familiar people are with keto. Is that a new term, or does everyone, who's hearing keto for the first time? Anyone? Yeah. So just kind of
Talk about both those things?
Talk about both of those things,
Right,
exactly,
right.
and your kind of revolutionary approach to fat.
I mean, the dietary guidelines were first developed under FDR to deal with nutritional deficiency diseases back in the war, because the recruits were all malnourished and they really wanted to focus on that. And then move forward to 1977, the government report developed the first dietary guidelines around chronic disease, which, believe it or not, was actually before we had most of our chronic disease, because the hockey stick on obesity and diabetes started going up in 1980. And I think it was really the result of the guidelines being driven not off of good science, but based on assumptions. And the guy who started the first guidelines was Mark Hegsted, who was a professor at Harvard, nutrition, who actually was paid by the sugar industry to say that sugar was fine and fat was bad. And was sort of the Ansel Keys movement around saturated fat being bad. So basically it was eating a low-fat diet, high-carb diet, and then it got sort of adjusted because the Dairy Council was really upset and they wanted more dairy, so they adjusted the next guidelines. But we came up eventually with the food pyramid, which was eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, syrup, and pasta, eat fats and oils only sparingly. So it's basically 11 servings of bread and pasta days was considered a health food diet, and I remember eating that. I remember recommending to my patients. And then sort of fast forward, they slowly adjusted. But a lot of the way the guidelines are developed are through committee members on an advisory group that are often conflicted with industry and then influenced by the USDA, which then guides the final guidelines. The USDA's mission is to support agriculture, to promote more sales of dairy, meat, products, and so forth. And so it really doesn't represent science as well as it could. And it's improved over the years. In fact, in 2015, we finally eliminated any restrictions on dietary fat. So there was no upper limit on dietary fat. There was still a limit on saturated fat. And there was a complete exoneration of cholesterol as a cause of heart disease from eggs and shrimp, which is kind of blew everybody's mind. People are still eating egg white omelets and putting skim milk in their coffee. And so now I think they're still problematic. They're much better, but they've left out huge swaths of data. For example, on saturated fat analysis, there have been 17 meta-analyses on saturated fat that find no link with heart disease. They're left out over 70 major studies looking at low carbohydrate diets for treatment of diabetes and various things. So there was actually a woman who literally single-handedly went to Congress to lobby congressmen and senators to commission a report by the National Academy of Sciences to review the guidelines process. And they found that the report was released in November, and they really found that there was a lot of conflicts of interest, that sort of the industry revolving door and the committee members, and that the science wasn't completely reviewed, and there was huge amounts of data that were ignored around particularly saturated fat and low carbohydrate diets. And so hopefully the next guidelines will be improved, but they also inform all of our policies. They inform what major public health organizations recommend. They inform what's in school lunches. They inform all the food programs in the government, and they need to sort of come more in line with the science. We had a dinner last night with Dariush Mazafarian, who's the dean of Tufts School of Nutrition and Policy, and we're talking about trying to establish a new organization in Washington, a cabinet-level position or an institute like the National Nutrition Institute, where we actually focus on aggregating all these disparate opposing things that confuse people. So we have, for example, the USDA, which is subsidizing corn, wheat, and soy, which is basically both for animal and human consumption, that are 99% of our subsidies, and 1% goes to specialty crops, which is fruits and vegetables, specialty crops. And then we create guidelines that say, eat less of that stuff, and then we pay for $750 billion our food stamp program. Our farm bill is basically about $1 trillion. 3/4 of that over 10 years is food stamps or SNAP, and $75 billion is what it costs a year, and about 10% of that is for soda, and the majority of it is for junk food. So we're paying for all the foods that we're growing, and then of course we pay for Medicare and Medicare on the back end. We have food labeling laws that don't represent true science, like in most countries. As green is good for you, yellow eat with caution, red this is going to kill you. And we allow unrestricted food marketing. The kids, so the FTC, the FDA, the USDA, HHS are all involved in different aspects of food policy, and they're often completely at odds with each other, giving different recommendations. So we really need to consolidate that into sort of an overall arching sort of organization that creates integrity in the process. And we're working on trying to make that happen. And then so I think we're moving in the right direction. And in fact, for the first time in history, the USDA opened for comments on the dietary guidelines, and we mobilized a team to sort of say, hey, let's look at these. And they actually called for requests to express concerns about saturated fat and low carbohydrate diets, which were not even included. And we know, like there was speaking of ketogenic diets, and this is a low carbohydrate diet. So those of you who are not am I talking too fast? Yeah. You guys are so smart. I figured we only have a little bit of time. So. My professor said I have a disease. It's called cerebral fibrillation with rapid mandibular response, which means your brain's going fast and your jaw's going fast. So anyway, the idea of a ketogenic diet is that we have two ways of burning energy in our bodies. We have a backup system. So we have glucose, which most of us run on, and then we have a backup system was fat. Now you can store about 2,500 calories of glycogen, which is carbohydrate in your muscles, last you for a good marathon, and you have about 40 to 50,000 calories of fat all around your body that you can use. And how much? 160,000. 160. Depends on, maybe I only have 40,000. Maybe you have 160,000. Sorry, David. Okay. So anyway, what's interesting about the ketogenic diet is that it's been used in epilepsy when no other drugs work, but now it's being explored for brain cancer, other cancers, because cancer only runs on glucose. It can't run on ketones, so you starve it. It's been used for Alzheimer's, autism, type 2 diabetes. In fact, there was a recent study published in February looking at about 250 type 2 diabetics doing an online program supported by health coaches, a ketogenic diet, which is essentially 70% fat, 20% protein, and maybe 5% carbs. And it was actually the diet that was used at the Joslin Diabetes Center to control diabetes before there was insulin, by the way. And they found that 60% of type 2 diabetes could be reversed, that 100% of diabetics could get off the main diabetes medication, which are oral hypoglycemics that cause heart attacks, And 94% could get off insulin or dramatically reduce insulin. And the average weight loss was 12%, which is phenomenal in a weight loss study, about 30 pounds. And it didn't make any headlines. Nobody's talking about it. It was sort of this silent thing. I mean, it should be, cover of New York Times, Time Magazine. This is a radical breakthrough. I mean, we see this all the time in our practice. People get off 200 units of insulin routinely in a few weeks. It doesn't take forever. I call it like a gastric bypass without the pain of surgery, vomiting, and malnutrition. and so, this diet can be very therapeutic. I don't think it's good for everybody, but it also has some interesting things in terms of fasting. So when you fast overnight, you check your urine, you're gonna have ketones in it because that's what your body switches to overnight. And there's a set of research that looks at calorie restriction as the only way to extend lifespan. So if you restrict your calories by 30%, you can live 30% longer. But it's not fun, right? You're gonna be miserable and hungry. I met a guy who was doing that, and I said, "What do you have for breakfast?" He said, "Well, I have 5 pounds of celery." I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like fun to me.
Bacon.
So with the ketogenic diet, or we call fasting mimicking diet, which is where you give a 14 to 16 hour break between dinner and breakfast or lunch, it actually stimulates stem cells, it reduces inflammation, improves insulin sensitivity, increases muscle mass, increases bone density, and literally reverses all the process of aging. And I've seen extraordinary results with it in autistic kids, and autism, and diabetes, and I think we were just beginning to sort of accelerate the research on here. But there is a lot of heterogeneity in our population. So this means that our genetics matter, and that different people respond differently to different diets and foods. So I've seen people thrive on a ketogenic, lose 30 pounds, drop their cholesterol 100 points, drop their triglycerides 200 points, raise their HDL 40 points, which is the antithesis of what you'd think you would do if you're eating coconut oil and butter, right? And yet others I've seen, have other adverse effects. So it really depends on your genetics and your overall biology. But I think it's an emerging trend because people find it works. You're never hungry, you have tons of energy, your brain's clear, and there was one guy I read about who was an Everest guide, and he was always trying to climb without oxygen, could never do it, and he was using a lot of carbohydrates to fuel his energy, and he switched to ketogenic diet, and he just walked up with no oxygen, which is impressive.
Wow.
So there's a whole idea of carb loading, that whole idea, it's just kind of not actually true. Sorry, I could go on forever, but I'll stop.
To pick up on the thread of how the government sort of shaped what we eat and how we think about the nutrition guidelines, I want to turn to Shane, because you're the only one on the panel who has that sort of experience with retailers and how they are shaping what we're eating. So would love for you to talk about, as an incredibly healthy product that you're putting into the market, what some of the challenges are for you in the retail space.
Well, thank you. I appreciate what everyone said, and particularly Mark's comments on the government. I was an attorney for the governor of Virginia, and before that, the Obamas, before starting a food company with my friends. So when I see how the tail wags the dog in that respect, it's even more profound now that we're in the weeds dealing with the distributors and retailers across the country. And we believe very much in food access to healthy food. And our job is to take what Mark has written about and take it mainstream as quickly as possible, but in a way that's really accessible, which means it has to be fun and delicious, or else no one will buy it. And then you get thrown out of the grocery store, and it gets very sad very quickly. So, Healthware had a pretty radical product, this little chia bar that launched on Amazon because we knew how much it cost to go to retail, and then at Whole Foods. And then all of a sudden, Target called and wanted it, and we said, oh boy, is America ready for something that has chia seeds as the main ingredient? But turns out they were more than ready for it. And I think maybe one of the things we're missing is that Americans, if we can get these in front of them and let them try it, they will come back for more and more. It's pretty amazing. Amazon's actually our biggest customer now, and almost half our sales are on Subscribe and Save. So once people try healthy food, once they get it in their pantry, they come back to it over and over again. But it's truly the cost of entry. It's funny, I think we found the food industry, I used to deal with stuff like capital punishment cases and the Virginia Tech shooting and sniper in Virginia, and I was like, the food industry is gonna be so easy. Boy, was I wrong. Yeah. It is very humbling, and at some point you wake up and you say, I understand why most of these food companies are 100 years old, because growing food, manufacturing food safely,
Yeah.
and having the agronomic work, the distribution. I mean, we like to talk about, really fun marketing stuff the company does. That's our forward-facing storytelling and working with the influencers, and Nick does, their platform does a great job on storytelling and giving book giveaways from our heroes like Dr. Hyman. But the truth is, you spend half your day making sure the trucks run on time, making sure everything's moved safely, and it's really I realize that a lot of the reasons I think that there's unhealthy packaged food is because at the beginning you had to make that food very safe for people to eat. You had to make sure there was no listeria, there was nothing that was going to harm people. But now, as we've advanced and watching the chia agronomic work go from almost nothing to $1 billion ingredient across the U.S., you realize that we really do have the potential to get out ahead of this and provide better options that are 80% of what Dr. Hyman's talking about. Like it's there, we can do it, and we can argue over keto, which sounds like you have to. It works great if you adhere to it very strictly. Complex carbs, the Ambutin, the blue zones. The main thing, people in the blue zones. Blue zones are the longest lived people in the world, the biggest populations of centenarians in the world. They mainly eat complex carbs and beans. I think we learned last night. So, we can argue over all that stuff, but 80% of it's set. We just have to make it delightful and accessible. But getting through distribution and getting into retail in the right way is a great challenge for a young company. So I just came back from Bentonville last week, and it was terrifying and exciting at the same time.
Alexia, I'd like to comment on that
Yeah.
too. I think on the fresh side, trying to work with channels that are optimized for shelf stability and margin expansion is very, very difficult. And that's one of the reasons why we've had to create this alternative distribution channel and go direct to consumer, because the economics of nutrient-dense foods through traditional retail is just very, very difficult.
Great. I think we'll do a quick lightning round question, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So just to bring this home to the conference theme of navigating a world in transition, I'd like to sort of go down the line and ask each of you what needs to change politically, culturally, societally for people to truly have the tools to eat right and support their long-term health through food. So if you're to say one thing that needs to change. People can stay after. And
Might be a long thunderstorm.
Starting with me.
Starting with you, yeah.
I'd say access. And of course, under access, there's all sorts of different multiple variations, but economics being a super important part of that.
Great, okay.
I think it's reimagining our food system as a whole and understanding the implication it has across everything that matters, from how we grow food, how we produce food, how we consume food, all the policies that drive our food system, and how those are driving our global epidemic of chronic disease. We have to get a hold of it, and I think nobody's connected the dots. So that's what I think needs to happen. That's what I'm working on.
Great.
Yeah, so I opened up talking about the 3 barriers that we think about, and obviously we've spent a lot of time on this panel talking about the third, which is like how to figure it out. But going back to Patrick's point, I think the actual structural barriers of just price straight up, like it is 25 to 50% more expensive generally to eat this lifestyle. That's a massive, massive barrier. In a country where we still have 40 million people on SNAP, 95% of people can't afford Whole Foods prices, even post Amazon. That's huge. And then I think the other one I would say is geography. Like I think most of us live in places where you're down the street from a health food retailer. Most of us may have the information where we can go on Amazon and find a great product like Health Warrior. But for a lot of people, they go on Amazon and they see Health Warrior in 500 other bars. Where do I start? And if they want to go down the street, it's 40 miles down the street to the nearest health food store. Like literally 60% of Americans don't live within driving distance. So that is a major barrier that hopefully online can take care of.
Yep.
Well, I think it all starts with culture. Whenever humans get too close to extinguishing ourselves, culture tends to rein us back in. If you think about this town and tobacco 30 years ago, it was cool for the movie stars to smoke cigarettes. And when you start to have professional athletes, we have a bunch of professional athletes that are investors. So instead of us paying them big endorsement deals, they actually buy shares in the company. When you start to have professional athletes and the thought leaders like Dr. Hyman writing books that get out there in culture, I think that will help the government and the policy and the science all align. And eventually we'll realize that we're doing our future generations a giant disservice if we don't give everyone access to genuinely good for you foods. So I think we just have to get out there into the streets and keep making this argument over and over again in an attractive way.
So there'll be a day when it's social and acceptable to drink a soda in public?
Exactly.
It might not be far off. I want to say thank you to these 4 amazing panelists and open the floor up for questions. And there's a microphone back there. We'll start with you in the back.
So you've all heard of personalized medicine, whereby, high in the back here, where doctors prescribe treatment for your disease based on your genetics. And I'm just wondering, will we eventually have personalized nutrition where you can create meals for people based on their genetics and what would make them healthiest?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not that far away. There's a company called Habit, which was actually a spinoff that Campbell's created, believe it or not, with Neil Grimmer, who started Plum Organics. We're giving people a home kit for testing. It's sort of disintermediating the healthcare system, where they drink this drink that then take their blood work, and it measures their metabolic type, whether they're insulin resistant or not, and how they respond to different inputs. So this is more a phenotypic response as opposed to genotype, although it's driven probably in part by genes. I think personalized gene nutrition is more tricky. I think you can look at, for example, matching nutritional needs in terms of, let's say, folate or various pathways. 1/3 of all our DNA codes for enzymes. Enzymes all need a vitamin or mineral to work, and there's different needs depending on your genetics. So that I think will happen. But I think like vitamin D, for example, there are people who are not great at vitamin D absorbers. They might need 10,000 instead of 400 units. We're going to get that. But on a global scale, I think personalized nutrition really has to do with more of your metabolic type, what's happening with all these other variables that's going on with your health, whether you have a leaky gut or not, all these factors. So yes, I mean, that's what functional medicine is. It's personalized nutrition applied.
Great. We had some questions in the front, I think. Here's.
Yeah, I think short of cloning Mark, which I'm very much in favor of, by the way. He's eloquent, fast, right on everything, and I totally agree with him. This
Is that why you scratched me and got my DNA?
No, I tell you, no. I've been in nutrition for 45 years, but I think the one missing element here is people look to their doctors for advice, yet their doctors know absolutely nothing about nutrition.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that the American medical system is a military system. Many of you saw the movie Lincoln before there were antibiotics. You saw all those limbs being thrown into a box. That's where American medicine evolved. And we had apprenticeships until 1913 with the Flexner Report. So today, I just wrote a textbook called Primary Care Nutrition, which I'll be going over with Mark, but we have 500,000 primary care docs in America. If we can get them, they have all your HIPAA information, they have the personalization, they have all this great science, I think that's where we really can get more marks around the world and in the United States. So I really want to make a push for medical education. I'd like to know your.
Well, we're actually with Tim Ryan from the Enrich Act. We've put in Congress to pay for nutrition education in medical schools, but less than 25% of medical schools have nutrition education. If they do, it's usually how to not get scurvy. And I'm not kidding. And so, I'm at Cleveland Clinic, one of the premier medical schools in the country, and they, they didn't have nutrition until we got there. Now we're implementing the curriculum. But it's a problem because food is the biggest cause of the disease we're seeing today. It's the biggest cure, and yet doctors learn nothing about food, and it's really criminal.
One thing that's interesting, though, is you look at your audience, Mark, and yes, you're working with people in your clinic, but she's also got millions of people, tens of millions of people, perhaps, that are reading your books, following your writing online. There's now a megaphone for the right ideas, and Thrive Market, we're serving 55% of our membership base. Almost 500,000 members are in the Midwest and the Southeast.
Yeah.
Average household income $75,000. So people actually are getting aware, even if their primary care physician may be clueless. The challenge is once they're aware, what do they do? Right? Where do they start? Can they afford it? Do they have access?
Mm-hmm.
I would say the other attractive thing is, and you mentioned this point earlier, there's now venture capital and private equity money. The market is coming to this new place.
Yeah.
And that's when Power Plant, Dan and Kevin's venture capital fund didn't exist 5 years ago when we launched nationally. And the sea change we've seen in the food industry in the last 5 years is just fascinating. I think we're right on the edge of an inflection point. And go back to Lincoln, if you remember, when he said there was a time for the 13th Amendment to pass, abolishing slavery. And he said the time is now. And I really feel, being in the weeds, that we're on the precipice of something really big.
That's great. I think we have a question up here.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm from Malaysia. I'm running an integrative healthcare center. So this question is really for Dr. Hyman. So we have heard about paleo diet, we have heard about ketogenic diet, and we have heard about plant-based diet. So from yesterday, it's all about plant-based diet at the dinner. So I really want to understand that despite talking about gene testing into knowing that what sort of diet a person should have, let's say in just a general term, which is the healthiest diet for us to adapt? Because I understand that ketogenic diet does not mean that it's a plant-based diet. It also contains meat, right? For ketogenic
You can have a
diet.
keto vegan diet.
Oh, okay.
It's harder, but you can.
Yeah. So and also the other thing is it compulsory to have organic food? I mean, in every aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a hierarchy of priorities, right? So there's, what are the principles that all of us should adhere to, or at least aspire to, and then what are the therapeutic, diets depending on the different needs. So I sort of, that's why I came up with the Pegan diet. It's just sort of a joke, but it really synthesized like 12 principles of what eating could be, that it allows a broad access to different eating styles. I think, the plant-based diet movement, I think, is good because we need to shift to more plant foods. And 70% of our agriculture is used to grow food for animals, for human consumption, as is about, I think, 70% of our water. That's unsustainable. And yet there's another sort of part to the story, which is something called regenerative agriculture, which is starting to kind of catch wind, which is the idea that we actually need animals as part of the agricultural cycle to restore soils. We had 60 million bison in this country. 150 years ago, until we killed them all. They built tens of feet of topsoil. There was no climate change then because of all the methane and the factory farming. And turns out that there's estimates by scientists that if we scaled up regenerative farming, that we could build soils and sequester. I think of the grasslands as the rainforest of the prairies. And it sequesters carbon massively. It holds water, prevents droughts and floods. And if we shift to that, we may need to sort of rethink this whole idea of just all veganism as the solution to climate change and health. I think that there's the issue of meat and whether it's healthy or not is a longer conversation. I don't have time to go through it now. You can read my books, but I think part of it is what you're trying to do with the food, right? So if most of us could move towards a plant-rich diet and consume sustainably raised animals or regenerative animals, I think that's a big movement. And actually, Thrive Market now is the first company to actually offer regenerative products on their website in terms of regenerative meat and sustainably harvested fish. Right, and so that's a big movement. So I think that's happening, and the conversation is shifting a little bit, because turns out if you look at collectively all the various aspects of our food system, food waste, tilling of soil, and all the things that we're doing, it's the number one way we can actually reverse climate change, more than fossil fuels, more than all that. So I think if you kind of get that picture, this is a very important area that is sort of being ignored. I just heard that Al Gore is now design a new aspect of his sustainability model, which is including the food piece, which he hadn't before. So I think that's really part of it. And organics, it's a hierarchy. Like if you're very poor and you actually can't afford organics, just eating more real food, I think, is a good idea. Ideally, when you look at organic agriculture, you could actually do tilling, which causes soil erosion. So it may not be always, have this halo that we think. There's industrial organic, which is not necessarily great. It's better than putting pesticides on your food, but I think the idea that we should sort of reduce inputs on pesticides and herbicides and nitrogen fertilizers is really important. Nitrogen is going off our farms into the oceans. I work in Cleveland, and Lake Erie just is a big algae pool where everything dies because the oxygen gets sucked out by the algae that's fertilized by the nitrogen that then creates huge dead zones in areas like the Gulf of Mexico, the size of New Jersey. And all these are connected issues to how we grow our food and what we're eating.
Unfortunately, I've been given the signal that this session is
sorry.
over. I need to get the next session in here. Thank you all so much.